All right. So Maria's the only one that I don't know who's on the call. So the three of you do have an understanding of the principles, and oh, we have some more joining us. But Angus and I thought we would just kind of do a bit of an introduction, just in case there's anybody that's not familiar with it. And I think at the beginning, maybe let's start out by muting everyone just for background noise. I'm just going to mute people. Here we go. All right. Hang on, Kath. What's going on here? There we go. So we thought that we'd just start with a general overview of how the principles, what the three principles are, and then talk a little bit about how, a couple of points that we found have been really beneficial in our relationship and the work that we do with couples in terms of supporting relationships to be more graceful and less painful, basically, because our relationship was quite painful, not all the time, but for a lot of the time over the years, percentage-wise, quite a bit. So as most of you know, the understanding of the principles really is it's a description of how our experience is created. And it was first, it was kind of uncovered, articulated by a man called Sydney Banks, who had an enlightenment experience, I think way back in like 1974. And he just had this huge epiphany. And from that, he started sharing what he saw and started teaching other people what he saw. And people's lives started to change. Their relationships changed. Their relationships with themselves changed. And so people's consciousness was impacted by this. And so I came across this understanding just completely inadvertently. I was doing a coaching training program, or I was wanting to do coaching training. I was a therapist and wanted to learn more about coaching. And so someone recommended that I sign up for Michael Neal's Super Coach Academy at the time. And at that point, it was, I think, the second year that Michael was offering it, and it wasn't a three principles training coaching academy, but he had one weekend where George and Linda Pransky came and spoke. And I was really impacted by that weekend. There was something that I heard. Oh, we have more. Hello, people joining us. There was something that I heard, but I couldn't. Yeah. Can you do it? Thanks. I couldn't articulate what it was. But I felt better. I felt lighter. I felt freer. I felt like something had been lifted, but I didn't understand. And I knew that I wanted to learn more about it, so I just kind of kept following the breadcrumbs, and I, worked with Michael Neal, then I worked with George and Linda in their mentorship program. And it was probably a couple of years into it before I really had any clue as to why I was feeling better. So my life was getting better, I was feeling better, but I really didn't understand it. And there was one point, I guess I had an insight. I thought I'd been having insights, but I had an insight that really kind of helped me see more about what they meant when they say where your experience comes from. And up to that point, I did see that my feelings came from my thoughts. I recognized that my feeling state wasn't being determined by outside circumstances, but it was coming from my thinking about, my thinking in the moment. But I thought that meant that I needed to change my thoughts, or that if I saw more about the principles, then I would have different thoughts. I thought that there were issues within me, not just thoughts. And I thought that by understanding the principles, these issues would kind of get resolved more, and that my responsibility in my work was to just see enough so that I didn't ever have these, uncomfortable thoughts again. And, Linda Pransky very kindly and directly but lovingly sort of said, Rohini, that's ridiculous in the sense that you're just feeling insecure. That's normal. There's nothing wrong with you. And the understanding points us to the fact that we have innate well-being inside of us, that is our natural state. And you just get caught up in insecure thoughts. And then they will naturally lose their momentum. You don't need to do anything about it. And then you'll come back into a feeling of well-being. And as simple as that sounds, and probably as obvious as it is for everybody else, that moment just lifted a huge weight off of my shoulders, because I hadn't seen how much pressure I was putting on myself to basically not be human, to not have any kind of negative emotional experience, that was a sign of weakness, that was a sign of failure, and that I thought that there was something wrong with me, that I was still having these negative emotions. And so when I saw that that was normal, and it just took all of this pressure off of myself, I just kind of relaxed into that peaceful mind state, that quiet mind. And I really felt it in a way that I'd never experienced it before. I was able to just sort of have a visceral, experiential, physical experience of well-being that was just really opened my eyes to what's possible. Now, from that experience, it completely shifted my relationship with Angus. And I'll say a little bit about what sort of the byproduct was, and then you can share, your part. But what happened when I dropped into that feeling of well-being is I saw things differently as a result of that. I was able to be in a stable state, independent of what was going on outside of me more often, not always, but more often. And so one of the things previous to this experience that would almost automatically destabilize me internally and have me be very reactive and judgmental and critical was if Angus was angry or, upset. And when I came back after that experience, when I came home, there was a moment, and Angus noticed a shift before that, but where it really struck me was there was a time when he'd asked me, would you do? You'd ask me, well, this is one of the times I remember, but he'd asked me, he didn't like how I asked him to take the garbage out, because I would kind of do it in a passive aggressive way, like not ask him directly to take the garbage out. And so I remember.
Is the garbage looking for?
Yes, I say something like that. And so I remembered this. And so I asked him directly if he would take the garbage out. And his filter was not hearing my words. He was just recognizing that it was about the garbage. And so he assumed that I was saying it in the old way that he didn't like. And you got irritated. And I was so shocked by the fact that he was irritated when I sort of really made an effort to say it in the way that I thought it would work for him, that it kind of threw me into this, like, I didn't take it personally at all. I didn't get destabilized. I didn't feel insecure. I just like, what's going on? And then I asked him, I said, what did you hear me say? But the specifics aren't what's important. What's important is that in the past, his energy of, upset, even if it was small, I would be so sensitive to that. And it would I'd get destabilized. And then immediately I would not see what was happening. And then I would get critical of him, get critical that he was angry. And then as soon as I would get critical that he's angry, then he would, feel more defensive. And then we'd just be off into some kind of fight. And in that experience where I saw that I could be okay, even if he was feeling annoyed, that my well-being had absolutely nothing to do with what his emotional state was, I felt this kind of freedom. And I also felt a huge amount of compassion that, oh, he's having a hard day. Like the fact that I can say something about the garbage and he's feeling irritated, like he's having a hard day. He's having a hard time right now. And I don't think that I really, honestly, I'm ashamed. It's sad for me to say, but I really don't think I'd ever felt compassion for Angus when he was angry before. I don't think that it ever occurred to me to consider where he was coming from and what was behind that. I only ever really thought about myself and how I didn't like how he was behaving. And that would create this chain reaction in our relationship that ultimately would end up with a lot of ill feeling and hurt feelings. And I'm grateful, very grateful that we had the capacity to, you know, not leave each other over that. We've come close, but we didn't. But we would try to work it through in the past through talking it through, like going into what happened, looking at the details of when you said this to me, that hurt my feelings and it didn't work for me. And this is what would work better. Like we just get completely in the weeds with that. And it would take a long time. And oftentimes when we'd start to have those conversations, it would just spark up the whole argument all over again. And then so we'd be going like argument, peace, trying to talk it through, another argument because you can't talk it through, peace, oh, try to talk it through, another argument. So our relationship was kind of rocky in the sense that we'd have these outbursts because we're both kind of fiery. We're both got that going on. And even though there was so much love there, that pattern drained us and it drained a lot of the goodwill out of our relationship. And it's really quite miraculous that we managed to keep it together in the way that we did. But as soon as I had that experience where I could see that my well-being was not determined by Angus's mood, it was not determined by whether or not he was, being angry with me, I felt such internal freedom that I knew and could feel the true love that was there. And it didn't feel shaky anymore. And this we'd been married quite some time at this point, and I had always kind of been 1 foot, maybe sometimes just a toe out the door, sometimes maybe a whole leg out the door, but I'd never really been 2 feet in the relationship until that point. I was too scared to. It was not that I didn't love him, but I didn't think that I could really be with someone that was like that, and like that meaning being human. I didn't realize that it was just being human. I thought like, oh, this is kind of a problem. And with that experience, I was able to, it was like, I'm all in. And being all in the relationship was a complete game changer for me. It really took the pressure off. It was the opposite of what I thought. Like, obviously not being 2 feet in was because I was scared. But when I eventually saw that I was okay and that I could be 2 feet in, and that Angus, being a human being with his emotional experience, wasn't going to take anything away from me, there was like this letting go of like, oh, there's nothing to think about here. There's nothing to worry about here now. I let go of a whole bunch of mental noise about the relationship. And letting that go allowed me to be much more present, available, and able to enjoy the relationship so much more. And it doesn't mean that we don't have our upsets. It doesn't mean that we don't ever have arguments anymore. But what the big shift, which I think is, just so amazing, is that the bounce back from something like that is so quick. And because, Angus is, I think Angus is very grounded and solid and not very easily flappable. Me, on the other hand, could be much more easily destabilized, could call myself very sensitive. So it's like, I was like, constantly sort of in getting my feelings hurt, feeling, taking things personally. And that still happens at times, but I just bounce back so much more quickly. And I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I think I have a better sense of humor about it. This is something that Angus doesn't always think I have a good sense of humor, but I think I have a much better sense of humor about my own idiosyncrasies, eccentricities, whatever you want to call them, in that area, and can kind of laugh about it even when I do get pulled into it. So that's the context that I wanted to really introduce on my side in terms of what I see as the understanding of the principles and why it has been so helpful and beneficial in terms of me being in relationship. It has completely changed my capacity to be in relationship. And it that ability to be all in it made our relationship so much better, and it made my life so much easier in the process. What you say?
Yeah. I'm curious for you to say now how, I am the grounded one, that I'm not easily flappable. And I guess the only response to that is that I'm probably better at camouflaging it, because I feel like in certain scenarios you seem to handle stress so much better than I do. And maybe I have a tendency to maybe keep it all in, I don't know, and then blow.
Well, I think where I'll be more specific is that you tend to not take things personally. You tend to have a pretty thick skin. I tended to not have a very thick skin. Okay, so you don't care what other people think about you. You're just not bothered in that way.
Yeah. But I do have a flappability scale.
Yes, you have a flappability scale. Okay. In other ways.
Just to be transparent about that. Well, I think that it's interesting listening to what you said, and for me, the big game changer when you were first exposed to the principles was that I suddenly had this experience of you being compassionate in the face of me behaving like a total brat and acting out. And I think that during the course of that, what was it, a year that you were going to Laconia to work with the Pranskys, I had basically turned a blind eye to what was going on, because I had, up until that point, been dragged to so many personal growth workshops, seminars, you name it, anything that was out there. Rohini had a passion for that kind of that arena. And so quite often it usually came in the form of an ultimatum that I behaved so abominably that our marriage is just not going to work unless we go and do this workshop. This workshop will change everything. And quite often the workshop, there would be, a mild transformation, so shall we say, but it never stuck, it never held. And then it was kind of sort of ironic about Rohini going to work with the Pranskys, that by that point I just lost interest. She'll go off and do her thing. She'll go off and spend an inordinate amount of money, and fine, I'll get some peace and quiet while she's in Laconia. And then so I really wasn't really very interested in what she was up to, and it wasn't, I think, until probably the third and final weekend that you were about to go up there, and or you'd just come back from the second weekend, I don't know, but you were quite far into the program, and we were at home, and even by my own standards, I was behaving pretty badly. I was having, I was really buying into my thinking. I don't know what I was taking personally, but I was taking something very personally, and I just started to really just go off on you. And something I'm not at all proud of, but I went off on you, and the reaction was just one of sheer compassion. And for all the work that we'd done over the years that I've been dragged kicking and screaming to, compassion was a buzzword that was often used, but I guess, we paid lip service to it, but this was a really palpable experience. Here I was acting out, taking something really personally, and your response to that was just I just saw compassion in your eyes. And not only that, when I actually quizzed you on it, I said, aren't you offended what I just said, or words to that effect? Isn't that really upsetting for you? And your response was, no, I can see that you're suffering and that you're really, buying into your thinking at the moment. And I just feel, I feel sad for you. And that just really threw me through a loop. That just really surprised me. And that was the point for me where I got interested in what she was doing. I was like, what is going on up there in Laconia? I need to know more about this. This is something that's unusual. This is different. This is different to everything else that she's done and she's experienced, and that there is this big sea change, and that continued. That didn't go away. We're human. We have our moments, obviously. And you're right in terms of what you say. Those moments are very short-lived in comparison to what they once were. But it was just that experience is like, yeah, this is what people are pointing to, this idea of compassion. This is what it looks like in the face of a couple going through the motions of an argument or whatever it is that's troubling them. That was really quite special and unique. And that was a turning point for me. And that was the point where I decided I would, I want to embark on this journey too. I need to find out what the three principles are all about. But it literally took, I guess it felt like most of that year, because you'd done the Michael Neal workshop prior to that too.
I was a slow learner.
Well, I wasn't. You were a slow learner. I was just like so gun shy about anything on the personal growth front by that point that I really had very little interest in it. But just to see the fruits of that, of that training and what it brought forward, that was the turning point for me. That was enormous.
So what do you see differently now from the understanding that you didn't see before? Like, what's different for you?
Well, what's different for me is I feel like, I'm a student for life on this front, as I'm sure that we all do, but I'm becoming much more attuned to being aware of my thinking when I'm in a state of reactivity, let's say, when I'm taking something personally. And I feel like I've really been going on about the dog for the last 2 weeks, but the dog has really become my spiritual teacher. And it's kind of cool because we have a trainer now that comes in once a week and gives us all this feedback.
Gives us training, basically.
We're being trained. So one thing that was very apparent to me this morning, it was interesting because she got us to do this technique with the dog just to get it to stay in one place. And then, and I feel like, I've really created this sort of atmosphere of me being the alpha wolf. I've been been with the dog more often than you have. And so I was kind of proud at the relationship that I had developed with the dog in terms of what I imagined that the trainer had been expecting from us. And then she got us to do this simple exercise. And then she said that Rohini had done a much better job than I had.
I got an A.
And that I had fallen short, which was really surprising to me because I really feel like I created this sort of alpha wolf syndrome, if you like. And Rohini was being less dominant with the dog. But what it boiled down to was that it was all about my feeling state. My feeling state in my interactions with the dog. But basically, I've started, and I can see, from this morning and from the principles through that lens, that my feeling state was all wrong with the dog. That I was actually giving the dog instruction, but from a place of irritability, from a place where I was letting my anger come to the surface, however subtly, but the dog was picking up on that and acting out from that place. And it was so interesting because it made me think about how, in relationship, as far as the principle is concerned, they constantly point to our feeling state, constantly point to how we're using our thinking and our state of mind in any given situation. And the fact that the dog immediately reacted to me, telling it to, pushing it down, trying to be dominant, being kind of irritated in front of the trainer, it was kind of cool. And I felt then immediately it felt ashamed because I was giving the feedback to the contrary. But she then said, no, you've got to be firm. You've got to be, you've got to make sure that he knows that, who's boss. But at no point do you want to be showing your frustration because he'll just react to that. Dogs don't really, they don't use language. They act more on the feeling and the senses. So then she got me to do the whole thing again without any of this energy on it, any, of the frustration, just to do it calmly, guide the dog with the leash, guide it. Don't pull on the leash. Don't create any tension on the leash. Just guide the dog to the bed, tell it to stay, take 10 paces back and just, see what happens. And it was extraordinary. I took all that off the table, all that energy, all that sort of frustration. I let that go. And the relationship with the dog was all of a sudden perfect. And it was completely compliant. So I guess I bring this up now because I just see how there's a corollary between, relationships in general. There's so much about relationship that is kind of like unspoken. Like there is a feeling and there's an energetic around it that if we communicate from that level, we generally get ourselves into trouble. And it's all about, how we're used, it's our thought and our state of mind. So I don't know if I went off on a tangent there, but that's what's present for me when you ask that question.
So we have some other thoughts about things to share, but we'd love to check in with everyone listening to kind of see if any questions have come up, any reflections, any thoughts before we move forward. So if anybody would like to share anything, or if you have a specific question you would like us to answer, and you can just unmute yourself by pressing the microphone button on the bottom left-hand corner of your square, I guess it's called.
I have something.
Go on, Jimmy, then.
I just, Angus, so that little tangent, I mean, it brings up something that I get frustrated a lot in my relationship with Veronique is, you know, we're so different that we have such, I mean, it's amazing how different we are, like just how we see things and our solutions to things. And so it's, I recognize that sometimes I can get frustrated in how different are what we see. And so kind of that frustrated energy, like I kind of, I don't know, maybe I have some judgment on myself around, or it doesn't feel that good, that frustrated energy that I recognize that, you know, it's not like I'm like, oh, cool, you know, Veronique, that's really great that she sees it way different than I, and she's offering, you know, a whole other perspective. It's like, there's frustration about how different we are. And but simultaneously, I'm also, you know, there's appreciation in it, but I'm still having to deal with the frustration. So there is kind of a question there.
So what is the question though?
Well, the question is, I guess it's, you know, I'm navigating through it.
We're having an earthquake.
Oh yeah, we just
earthquake.
did. You feel that, Jimmy?
Yeah.
We're shaking.
Okay. All right. We're good now. Sorry, everybody. Yeah.
That was, yeah.
It's a little shake. Okay.
Little shake. Not a big one.
As a metaphor for the importance of your question, Jimmy. I'm going to take it really seriously now.
Ooh. Let's hope we stop shaking here. Yeah. Okay. So
you're navigating the frustration. Sorry, I got distracted by the earthquake. It's like what to do about the frustration? Is that what you're asking, or? Oh, hang on, someone. I just need to. There we go. Someone was unmuted. Is that the question, Jimmy? In terms
yeah,
of
I mean, I was just. It was. You know, when Angus was saying, like, he had frustration with the dog, and then, you know, when he kind of, it just works so much better without the frustration.
Yeah, that resonates with me a lot. I mean, I think, you know, you talked about a sense of humor earlier. That the only time that I really am, I'm irritated by your lack of humor, shall we say, is if I'm out of balance. So I feel like I'm usually looking for something to hang my upset on. So, and that can more often than not, that has been a target in the past. So I find that when I am, if my feeling state is in a place of balance, then I'm far less likely to go to all those sort of quote unquote frustrations that might feel typical. So with Rohini, I think humor was one of my long running complaints. But I feel that once I'm in a place of balance and I'm kind of conscious of that, then I can see how all of those sort of irritations, however minor or great, never really take hold on me. I don't know if that resonates with you. I mean, that's certainly seen something that I've seen that's new since my exposure to the principles. Looking at it through that lens, I can see that when I'm out of balance, then I'm usually hunting for something to hang it on. Like, for argument's sake, something happened at the weekend which was completely unrelated to you, but it upset me, and it was something that I kind of was starting to hold on to. And then I think at one point I lashed out at you, which, by the way, sorry for. But it was just a case of, like, you know, I was holding on to some angst and I didn't really know what to do with it. And again, it was just a sort of case I needed to, I probably find I couldn't control the situation that I was in, but I was looking for something to control. I was looking for something to hang it on. Yeah.
So in terms of, also, I think what you're saying is that frustration is just is feedback that we're in a low mood. So if we understand that we're in a low mood and all that's going on is that our thinking is stirred up, then it's much easier. I find it much easier when I see that to be kind to myself and to not think about whether it's, what Angus is doing or the kids or whatever, and realize like, I just need to take care of myself. And as soon as my thinking settles, my mood is going to normalize and I'm not going to feel frustrated anymore, or whatever the difficult feeling is. But it's kind of the understanding what's happening in the moment for me allows me to take better care of myself, so that I'm not, one, not fueling all of that thinking, but two, treating myself in a way that will actually allow myself to settle down.
Yeah, and also that now is becoming more of an indicator. Like if you're irritating me, in my better moments, I see that as an indicator that I'm probably out of balance, and this is not time to engage or take it personally.
Yeah, just and that was kind of one of the things that we were I think as Angus and I were talking about the webinar, one of the themes that came up that was so helpful to us is to realize that we don't have to take our thinking seriously just because we're having thoughts. It's so liberating the more I see that I don't have to pay any attention to those thoughts. Like I might not be able to stop them, but I actually don't have to pay attention to them. So if I'm angry with him, I can have all those angry thoughts, but I can still get on and do something else. And then they just settle down because they're not really useful. And then the culture clash, or in our household, isn't such a big culture clash.
Well, and I think that's, I think that's what resonates the most, what you just said, because the frustration, when I don't make a big deal of it, it does pass very quickly. And do I need to figure out why I'm getting so frustrated? That's generally doesn't really help.
This is low mood, just falls under the category of low mood. Like none of us can explain it.
Or even if it wasn't even under that category, it's just comes and it goes, or it's surfacing. But it can be under the category of low mood. So
thanks, Jimmy. Diane, you've got your hand raised.
Yes, I do. I have a question with regards to relationships where, Angus clearly got curious when you were so compassionate towards him, and clearly he lashed out at you, and he felt, okay, I need to go. What about with couples where one is clearly busy with, that's a Dutch expression, busy with the principles, and is finding that this understanding is gently changing the person's life, but the partner doesn't know anything about it and doesn't want to have anything to do with the principles, or doesn't show any interest. Can that have a profound impact on the relationship all the same? I think yes, but I'm curious.
You want to answer?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, that's okay. Go ahead.
Well, I think for me, what happened, what was so interesting was that when Rohini started to come forward from a place of compassion in the face of me acting out, I really got to see, it was like a mirror was being held up to how I was behaving. And I really got to see how I didn't like how I was behaving. And it really made me want to change, really. And I think that's why I felt like, I really want to look at this, the three principles. This is interesting. But it took a while. But just to be able to have that mirror held up to me just through her compassion really gave me the opportunity to take a really good look at myself in terms of how I was reacting to her. And that really pushed me to want to change, because I don't think I saw it before. Because I think in the past, what would happen is that I could be reactive, and then she would fight back. We'd lock horns, and then we'd be off to the races. But now that was no longer in play. I just got to see how I was showing up, and I didn't like the look of it.
Yeah, I would say that our relationship shifted before Angus really had any idea about what was going on in terms of the three principles. And so I do think that even one person in a relationship, the relationship can transform. And what Angus is talking about is that because I wasn't engaging with him in the same way, he basically was confronted by his own conscience, not by me criticizing him or judging him. He was able to feel his own conscience in a way that he hadn't really been able to feel it before. And his own wisdom, whether he knew anything about the principles or not, his own wisdom guided him to where he wanted to go in terms of how he wanted to experience things. So all it really took for us, and I've seen this with the couples that we work with, not always is each person in the couple relationship wanting to participate. Sometimes it's just like, one of them is going to come in and see one of us and the other one doesn't want to have anything to do with it. But if that one person has that shift, there tends to be this ripple effect in the relationship of goodwill, of loving, that ultimately is contagious. And it brings out the best in both people. I mean, when Angus and I were having more of a difficult time, we were just bringing out the worst in each other. We were just communicating from both of our low mood. We were from that place taking things personally, and the goodwill and the feeling in the relationship really suffered as a result of that. But when one person stops doing that, when I was no longer engaging with him when he was in a low mood, that transformed our relationship. And I no longer felt like I couldn't be with somebody who was angry or in low moods. Like I just saw it's going to pass. He'll get over it. So it just brought out the best in both of us, even though he really at that point hadn't got any interest in what had helped me. Does that answer your question, Diane?
What I'm hearing is, if I may, that what got Angus is you're not engaging, but more so the compassion that you showed Angus.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm getting. And another thing that I'd like to comment, if I may, is that in no instance, not in a coaching relationship, not in a one-to-one relation, we cannot get anyone to see anything. It's always inside out. The impact happens because someone hears something. So
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Does anybody else have a question or anything else you'd like to share?
Can I say something?
Yeah,
hi.
Hi.
Hi. I really like what you said before about not going into the frustration with Angus, but instead focusing on how to take care of yourself. Because it's so easy to spend a lot of time thinking about what is wrong with the other person and thinking about what is wrong with your relationship and why it's not working and why. And all of this is like you're in the shower, you're in the toilet, you're in the work, you're everywhere, and your mind is full up with this trying to intellectually solve or understand. And I just like what you said, just shifting the focus, not just doing like doing good things for yourself, but taking care of someone, if it's yourself or if it's your dog or if it's the people in your job. So shifting the focus from the anger and frustration into something that's better or helping or not keeping you in this, I don't even know what to call it, this vortex of anger, frustration, and sadness. And I just really like that, not like a method, but for something to shift and maybe then have some release and relief. And maybe then seeing the other person in a better light.
Yeah.
I really like that.
No, thank you. And it's common sense. Like when I was going into my frustration and anger, the only reason I would do that and kind of think about it and think about everything wrong with our relationship and why Angus, needed to change. And the only reason I would do that was because I thought I would find an answer there.
Yes.
That was going to get me somewhere. And as soon as I saw that focusing on that is only focusing on my low mood thinking, and that there's no answer in that, and that actually isn't the problem, and Angus isn't actually the problem. The only problem is that my thinking is destabilized in this moment, that I'm just all stirred up inside of myself. Then it's like, oh, that's the problem. Then automatically common sense then has me look at, well, how do I help myself stabilize then? Because I think we're all designed to want to feel better, and to if we're suffering, to not just stay there. So it's like automatically it no longer made sense to do that. So you're saying, it's not a technique. It's not like a skill that I had to learn. Oh, I mustn't do that, or a technique to look in the other direction. It's like, oh, well, if that's not going to work and all I need to do is let my thinking stabilize, then of course I'm going to, go for a walk or read a book or take a nap or whatever makes sense in the moment. So thanks so much for highlighting that. And thanks for being on the call. It's so nice to see you.
Thank you for having the call. Thank you.
I wish there would come a day. Well, I feel like there will come a day when I can get to a level of understanding where I can really see, in the moment of me having a real human experience of being upset, that I can immediately default back to that idea that, yeah, I don't need to take this seriously. This is just me taking a situation very personally. But I still get caught up, from time to time, and as we all do. But it's definitely, I feel like it's improving. But I feel like I wish there was someone just to sort of cuff me over the back of the head. You're just taking life too personally. Stop it.
We'll use the dog training technique. We'll put a prong collar on you, just yank it.
That's right. But I guess what I was thinking was, like, when you said, Kath, that, I think you may have said you wish there was some sort of technique or something, but I think there is, and I thought that too. I wish there was something that I could do in those moments that would take me out of it. But I think really it's just having the experience of illustrating to myself that I do calm down. Inevitably, I always calm down. I come back to my natural state. And even the other day, I think on the Sunday when I got mad at you, I went through an experience of really pretty much hating you in my head for a good while. And then I actually felt I went to sleep and I had a dream where you were really lovely in the dream. And then I woke up and I had completely settled, and I could really see how I just taken my thinking really personally and just gone to this really absurd place, really just because out of force of habit, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And it was a great demonstration to me. Yeah, it's really about where I am in my mind, in my mindset, my current state of feeling. All that took was to see that, that you did love me, there was compassion, and that I could settle. And from that place, I had none of the same sentiment going on.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
But I didn't, it wasn't like I needed a technique, but it's interesting.
Yeah. And then Kath didn't ask for technique, by the way.
I guess that's how I wanted to hear it.
But it's that shift between when I'm in the upset to when I'm settled, the shift in how my world looks, how Angus looks, like the evil Angus to the lovely Angus. Like, it's just so amazing to me how real it looks when I'm upset, like how real it looks, like he is just a jerk and that's how it is and it's not going to work, or whatever it is that I'm thinking. Like, that looks so real. And then all of a sudden, 10 minutes later, I'm more settled. I'm like, what was I thinking? So it's just really about realizing, like, oh, that looks real is not really how it is. And not that I'm seeing things objectively, but I think I'm seeing things more clearly when I'm in a settled state. And I get to see, like, this is the guy that I love. And yeah, he's not perfect, but neither am I. And this is totally workable and doable. And why would I not want to be with him? So it's like, it's just getting to realize when we can distrust our version of reality when we're in that place of upset. And we get better and better at being more skeptical. I get better and better at, realizing I don't have to give it a lot of attention because it's not really going to serve me and there's not really going to be any good there. Anybody else have something they'd like to share with the group? Thank you, Kath. Any other questions, comments, new thought, updates?
I mean, it's almost.
I should have a gavel. Going.
I got in.
You did.
It's almost humorous. I mean, as you were just saying that, I'm like laughing. I'm going, it's so funny and silly when I get caught up.
Yeah.
I mean,
it is. When we're not caught up, we can see that.
Right. I mean, right now it's humorous. I'm like laughing at, it's like, oh my God, how is it designed like this? That we can be so caught up, and then literally as soon as we're out of it, it's completely different. We see it totally different. I mean, it's a little mind-blowing, but I guess not. The more I experience the two different states and kind of understand it, like what's happening in there to a point, understand it. I don't know, it's entertaining in a sense that it can be so different.
And also, so I think just it's so powerful to see the capacity for our thinking to be brought to life. Like, that's amazing. What a gift that we have this capacity to have an experience based purely on thought. Like, wow. We just tend to at times not use it in the best way for ourselves, but it like to see kind of like that's possible. That's really what we're doing all the time. To me, is just so amazing that we have that ability to create our reality. Like, wow.
Yeah, no, I love what you just said, because sometimes it puts it in perspective. It's like, oh, when I'm experiencing that frustration, it's like, yeah, that's incredible that I'm like being shown what I'm like it's just showing me where I'm at in that moment. Right?
Yeah. You get to see like, oh, that's where my thinking's at. It's kind of like a wake-up call.
Yeah. And that can be amazing in itself. Like I don't have to like look at that frustration and go, I don't like that. On the other hand, I can be like really grateful that like I'm being shown through the mastery of these principles, like where I'm at in that moment.
Yeah. It's like course corrective.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Jimmy.
We've had some moments too where, I feel like I might be upset and I might be acting out, and we would engage. Maybe we're both on the same page for those fleeting moments where we do, lock horns. And I love there comes a point and it feels like wisdom suddenly kicking in, and I can totally see the humor. It's almost like there's some sort of improv going on. My small mind, my monkey mind is just acting out, and I kind of step back and look, what the hell are you doing? But it is kind of funny.
Yeah.
And we smile and laugh.
Crack ourselves out. Diane, you got your hand raised again.
Yes, I do. Jimmy said something that caught my attention, and I think he said, how does it happen? And I think it seems to me that we have been given this gift of thought and that we can create our experience or whatever. And I don't like to dismiss one important factor, that we have this most amazing brain. And we cannot deny the years of conditioning. I'm going to be 51. Low states, low moods, ebb and flow. And when we get caught, I mean, you can't just go into your brain, snip the wire and say, that's it. I'm gonna unsnip this wire. We all know we've been gifted now thank you, Sid, with this understanding of it's thought in the moment. But I can't not expect myself to have these brilliant insights, but also discount the fact that I have been conditioned. It's like darkness in the absence of light and light in the absence of darkness. So to me, they go hand in hand. And having this knowledge, then I can be appreciative of the whole shebang. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah, that makes absolute sense.
I love that.
And that I think it's all for us. Like, yeah, I have my preferences. I like my good moods. I don't like my low moods, but I think it's just all for us. It's all part of the unity and the oneness. And it's just my personal preference that, likes one and not the other. But I think that ultimately it's in service to our awakening, all of it.
Yeah, and I just love the idea that I can be unashamedly human.
Yeah. No, that's such a blessing to just be okay with exactly where we're at, right? It's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jay, do you have a comment or question? I see your hands raised. Oh, here, I'm going to unmute you. Hang on a second here. How do I do it?
Hi.
Oh, there you are. You're unmuted now. There you go.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hello.
Hi.
So a few thoughts come to mind as I am reclining here listening. One is that when I'm in a moment of either receiving or about to get tripped up myself, I like to ask myself in that moment, when I can, pause long enough to say, how old am I feeling right now?
Mm.
Because I think it's more than just what I'm thinking. It's more than my thoughts are just being tripped up. Usually when I get tripped up, it's actually because I've been triggered by an event from my past, perhaps from my childhood, that is unresolved. So it doesn't matter that I'm 56 years old or 46 or 36, but when I'm tripped up or triggered by people, places, and things, it usually is something from my past that I have not worked through. It's unresolved wounds, scars, or traumas that bring me right back there. And it's interesting because once I've understood this concept and I've been in a coaching opportunity or just with a friend or a relative, and I see that they're in a moment of total emotional trigger, I could actually ask myself, how old do I think they are right now? And I could actually see through their body language, their facial language, I can almost pinpoint about what age they may be. And I've actually had the opportunity to ask a few of them in that moment, how old are you feeling right now? And if they're willing to be honest and show some vulnerability, it's pretty interesting to see what they're able to recognize in that moment where they're at. And so that's the lesson that I've learned, is that I think it's more than just what I'm thinking. It's what I'm feeling. It's the emotion. It's what's behind that thought or that feeling that when I'm able to work through and acknowledge and have what I call the awareness of what is it about this moment that has tripped me up? What happened in my past or something similar that has brought me to this point that it kind of changes or gives me the opportunity to really explore what additional work do I need to do to heal myself, to heal my soul, so that I don't continue to behave like that 13-year-old or that 10-year-old or that 5-year-old that trips me up or that's tripped me up time and time again. So
I think that what you're saying is a different orientation than where we're coming from. And if it's okay, I'll just kind of share where we're coming from in terms of all of that, because I think that one of the the piece of common ground in what you're sharing is that absolutely we make up ideas and understandings throughout our life that carry through us. As Diane was saying, we get conditioned, oftentimes at a very early age. But when we're saying that it's really just thought in the moment that creates our suffering, that's no matter what trauma, whatever experience happened to us in the past, in the present moment, the only way that we can be having that experience is through memory, which is thought. And when we see something as thought and recognize that it's created in the present moment, that it's not something that has any roots other than thought in the moment, there's such liberation in terms of being able to be set free from the suffering associated with that. And so I'm absolutely not denying that painful things happen in the past and that we have those memories that come up in the present moment. And I might be feeling 5 years old, 7 years old, whatever age is related to that thought when it first occurred. But that's by looking into where it came from, what that did in terms of my own personal experience was it got me more into the reality of that pain and suffering. And so that was what would come up with Angus and I a lot, in the sense that, when I was 2.5, my father, he left I guess he left. I never saw him again. And so in therapy, it's like I'm working on my abandonment issues and looking at all of the content and the details and the feelings. And then when Angus would, not be nice to me, or he'd, do something, I'd feel, oh my God, it's the same thing. It's happening all over again. And that being identified with that as an issue that was unresolved is what really kept it alive in my consciousness. And so when I was able to see that all I'm experiencing, all any of us can actually experience, is thought in the present moment. It's nothing more than that. What it did was it helped me to have a different relationship with whatever these thoughts were that were coming up. And that's what changed my emotional experience. And that's what changed the what might be called a trauma response inside of myself, was that all of that settled down when I was able to see that my feeling state wasn't being determined by what happened in the past. It wasn't being determined by something that could never be changed, and that I didn't have to take whatever the misunderstanding or judgment was that I'd placed on myself as being unworthy or not good enough or unlovable. I could see that for what it was. It was just thought in the moment, and it had no relationship to anything outside of that moment other than it was a conditioned thought that I'd had a lot. So for me, that was the gift that the principles really helped me see, was that if all I can experience is my thinking, and if every single feeling that I have is in response to whatever thought is present, and that the natural state is to be in peace, harmony, equilibrium, that is the true nature of every single human being, then the freedom comes from seeing when I'm bringing to life thoughts that are creating a different experience. So I might not be able to stop the first thought coming in that I'm not lovable, but I at some point can wake up to that that's not truth. That's a thought that I'm having, and have the ability to take dominion in my consciousness and to not buy into it. And so for me, in terms of the freedom, came from not going into the content and simply understanding what was happening in the moment. I know that we're coming at this from different angles, and I don't want to take away from what has been of service to you, but I do want to be clear in terms of the orientation that we're sharing from is a different philosophical point of view. So that's why I wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Drawer's got his hand up.
Okay, hi Drawer.
Hi guys, I'm driving, so if I'm not going through technology well, then I'll just...
Okay, we can hear you.
You can hear me. So first I want to say thank you. I'm getting married this weekend. And I
Yes.
give a lot of credit to the three principals and to you guys. And I'm on the way to the airport to pick my dad, my aunt, and all kind of a gang from Israel. And yeah, the last 2 weeks were such an interesting thing for Julie and me, for me specifically, to realize why. I think I really got more and more why it's more about the understanding and not getting it or anything else. Because this understanding, being around all kind of changes of life and being around both families and all stuff that can come up that in the past we would go ballistic. This time our moods went up and down, but we really could help each other spiral down or disengage or really, realize it's not good for us to communicate when we're both in bad moods, and it worked really, really well. And hearing what you shared in the beginning, Rohini, I mean, I've been through that so many times, but I could see how much I could have more compassion when Julie gets stuff, comes up, in the house that she grew up.
Mm.
And in the past, I was like, it's in the past, it's like, I get exactly what it is, but this time I just let it be and realize, she's going through that, and that's going to pass, and it did pass.
That's right.
And there were several times that I was really, really on my toes. And I don't know, just to me, this is really working. And I'm not talking just pre-marriage. I'm talking about being around our family.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many parameters that this thing works. And it's amazing that you also don't even need to explain it.
Right.
I'm having this conversation with my brother-in-law, and he has very, very active mind. And I'm just telling you, it's just your thoughts, and they're not real. And he gets that. And he really gets, we don't need to get into any psychology conversation or anything like that when you realize that somebody sharing me is just his thoughts, and the conversation goes differently. So thank you so much. And I really get why it's more about the understanding rather than anything else. And thank you. Great.
Thank you, Jordan.
Thanks,
I'm wishing
Joel.
you lots of love and congratulations. We'll be thinking of you on Sunday. We'll actually be
Yeah.
watching it on the live stream. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, does anybody else have anything they'd like to share before we finish up? Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
I'm curious to know what other thoughts you had, and I feel as if I talk a lot. You had other thoughts that you wanted to share with us.
Yeah, so we can talk about that briefly. And if anybody else wants to share anything, then just, how do you raise your hand, Diane? How do people raise their hand? I can't see it online.
Joel would know.
Okay, I'll click on click on participants, and on the right-hand side, a thingy should appear, a thingy, and you see raise hand, mute me.
Okay, so for if anybody would like to share, then just click on that to raise your hand, and we'll be able to see that. So Angus and I were talking about what we felt would be really what were some just one or two key things that we felt really had the most leveraged impact on our relationship shifting. And the one that came up for me, and I mentioned it earlier, was that what I saw previously was that when I was upset, I wouldn't realize that my thinking wasn't credible when I was upset. And so I would take it seriously, and then I would try to find solutions that were based on my thinking that was just distorted and disturbed. And so that would take up a lot of time and energy and ultimately never result in any good resolution, because whatever solutions I would come up with were based on faulty thinking anyway in the first place. So for me to be able to see that not taking my upset thinking seriously, to have the ability to discern when to disregard my own thinking, and that, I guess I took my thinking, it's like I really gave a lot of credibility to my thoughts. So to be able to see that I don't have to give it credibility was what actually allowed me to settle down more quickly. And obviously, the sooner I settled down, the easier life got, just for myself, but the easier it would be to be in relationship with someone else. So as simple as it sounds, to me, that was the most leveraged thing, was recognizing when I was in a low mood or reactive, however you want to label it, to be able to see that whatever was occurring to me during those times was not something I wanted to consider. It was going to be fear-based, it was going to be distorted, it was going to be histrionic, it was not going to be useful. And that I had the choice. I didn't see that I had choice before. It felt like, I just needed to pay attention to it. But I saw that I actually have choice. Just because I've got a big emotional reaction inside of me, that big emotional reaction, the bigger the feelings, the less I want to pay attention to my thoughts. And I had it wired the opposite. I had the bigger the feelings, the more I pay attention to my thinking, the more I have to do something about it because I'm really not okay. And so by becoming more understanding of my emotional experience, knowing that it was coming from distorted thoughts, coming from unhelpful thinking, that allowed me to have more space for my human experience. And take care, Jay, bye. I'd have more space for my emotional experience because it wouldn't scare me as much. I'd know that it would settle down, and that I would not use the coping mechanism of trying to dig into all of my thinking to make myself feel better. Instead, I would just know that I was going to feel better, and that I would feel better sooner by not engaging with all of the noise in my mind. So that was my key point that came up.
You had a key point. I was actually really, and I really love what you said, Diane, about the wiring, because I think that I've often used analogy with me having like this hard drive thinking, which is this storage system of data, historical data that I can access at any given point. But I always feel that when I'm in that mode, I'm really forgetting about my essential nature, the idea that we have access to new thought, new inspiration. But I was thinking about, the wiring analogy, because I feel like there are times where, in the same way that I feel like I default to my analytical mind, which would be the hard drive and the data storage, that I could also see it as all this wiring in my brain that's been formed over the years. I've been programming and creating new wires and new outlets for understanding. But what I tend to do when I get out of balance is I put too much power through any one wire. And in that scenario, things burn out. So for me, I guess in terms of what you're saying, it's about having the opportunity just to see how and I'll speak for myself, become so reliant on my analytical mind when I'm in a place of imbalance, when I'm feeling like things are pushing me towards fear and I want to control, I want to rectify my situation, that the better scenario always is just to really try and put myself in the moment, to live in the now, and just to accept that there is, that I do have my essential nature and it's kind of got my back, and that really the limitation is coming from me really feeling like I need to just rely on my analytical mind, rely on what I already know. And why I like the hard drive analogy is it's because it's kind of feel like there is, that the data is kind of like, I guess, embedded in a disk, and the more that I dwell on that, the deeper that groove becomes, and it's easier for me to fall into that at any given moment. But once I see that and recognize that really that is just stale, it has the capacity to be stale thinking. Obviously, there are advantages in having an analytical mind that we can know as a child not to put a hand on a radiator, and various other things that can serve us very well. But it's also good to see that it has its limitations. And I think that for me, that's been a big shift, is to realize that when I'm generally out of balance, it's because I feel like I'm falling into an old groove, an old habit of habitual thinking, and probably putting way too much power through that one wire. And that's when I tend to burn out. and just being able to disengage and see that, yeah, my essential nature is to want me to come back to my place of balance. That really has really, started to serve me really well. And in the context of, whether it's the dog, whether it's you, any given scenario where I start to feel like I'm feeling that this is overwhelming, like the dog, for argument's sake, felt very overwhelming. And I put myself in a situation where I started to really go into the future about all the ways and means that it was going to disrupt and play havoc on my life. And it became really painful. And I really suffered with that experience for a good few days. So once I saw this, and you helped me see this, I was trying to convince you that this was my wisdom talking. And you said, well, how can that be if you're projecting into the future? That sounds like your analytical mind. It doesn't sound like, you're really necessarily accessing your wisdom. Once I let that go, so much of what happened with the dog and my relationship with the dog became so much easier, because I let go of all those old sort of grooves of thinking, all those scenarios that I had in my head. So that's I think for me, that's something that I'm just really wanting to expand into at the moment. And that's what, I wanted to share, was just this idea that I can see, and I kind of like, it feels like it keys into what Jay was saying, talking about how, we have all these, these triggers that are probably coming from our childhood. Really, none of that matters. It's just, it was a once upon a time thinking at the moment that we created a habit around, and it grew from there, and it propelled itself from there. But it was all just thought. It's not something that I need to take personally or seriously. I can let it go.
Thanks. I see Kath, you got your hand raised. Oh, hang on. Do you want me to unmute you?
Okay.
There you go.
There you go.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
You just reminded me of something that I need to know deeper. And that's the thing, that when you make decisions in a low mood, in a bad place, in your anger and your frustration, these are not good decisions. These are not decisions that you need to kind of take with you and base the rest of your life on. And when you spoke about it, it really made it clear for me that they are so fear-based, and they are so projecting what might happen in the future that you want to protect yourself from. And some of these decisions are huge and really life-changing. And if I make them in this place of fear, and I believe in them, and I act on them, and I put them into my life, this is how my life will be. And I need to be careful. We need to be careful by not supporting our life in the decisions we make in these moments. And you reminded me of this, and now I see it more clear, and this was really good for me to see.
Oh, thank you, Kath. That's great.
Yeah, I've become really conscious of how I do that. And again, with the dog, that was one really huge example about how I wanted to project into the future. I mean, I got into such a low mood that I was, ready to give the dog back. I was on the way to give the dog back, basically. And I had forgotten, that I have this capacity to really, make these radical decisions from a very low mood, and it can affect the rest of my life. And it was really good to be able to see how, and particularly I think it came to light for me in having conversations with people, having a conversation with a client and talking about how relationships can break down by this capacity to project a low mood into the future by creating all these sort of, the negative future fantasy, all these scenarios that can come into being from our imagination. And then I got off the phone. I thought, Jesus, I'm doing that with the dog. I'm doing exactly the same thing. I'm robbing myself of the capacity to have a relationship with this dog based on negative future fantasy. Why don't I just surrender into the moment? Why don't I see what it's like to be in the now and allow, the idea of the principle of mind just to sort of inform me? And that was a game changer. It was huge. And it still feels like it's something new and fresh to me. And I'm still feeling like, wow, yeah, I can see how that plays out so much in my life. And it's great to be able just to have that awareness, and I feel like it will really inform and help me.
Well, it's amazing that we have this deeper intelligence that is available to us real time when we get present. And that when we're not present and when we're in our head and we're trying to figure things out, we completely cut ourselves off from that resource that ultimately is the energy behind everything. And, you know, everything ultimately comes from there. And what you're talking about, Kath, in terms of fear, that's when we're in that small part of our brain, in the wiring, as Diane would say, we're caught up there. And we're not really open to what's really available and what possibilities are really there for us. And it, like, we wouldn't, like, I have to show you guys, we wouldn't have, where is he? We wouldn't have him. You can't see him, he's so cute, he's on his back. There we go. But anyway,
they're probably getting motion sickness.
They're probably getting motion. But it's like we wouldn't have this dog if Angus had followed what he thought was his wisdom, which was really just his fear. So, thank you. So, anything else, or are we done? George?
I would just, I'd like to add to what you were saying about not taking things seriously. For me, it was also not taking things personally.
Yeah.
You know, not just seriously, but personally, because I could practice, you know, the 4 agreements of not taking anything personally in my life besides my relationship. You know, every time it was with a partner, it's like, it's gotta be personal. And now I really realized that I used to be like 90%, that so much of what I used to think is personal has nothing to do with me. It's just nothing. And it's so helpful to grow this awareness. You know, I'm not 100% of the time I'm successful with it, but the minute this thing, it's not personal, it's just a big relief and really helped me to see things differently and get over it faster, and just very, very not take it personally and not take it too seriously. It's really, really helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Dror.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, time to get your gavel out.
I know, I want a gavel.
Going. All right, well, thank you, everybody, for showing up.
Thank you so much.
It's so nice to spend this time. And I just love being in the conversation with everybody. I love what you've all shared and just being in the feeling together. It's just such a gift to have the community that we have. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Before you go, after you stop recording, can I just speak to you for 2 minutes?
Sure. All right, then. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Lots of love.
Bye.
Bye. See you.